That's his suggestion.
What should we do now?
Oh, because the light goes only to here, not here. Oh, the bottom of this box has electricity in here, but this doesn't have electricity. It's lighting up. So you need to put 4. So you need to put 4 on this one to make it light up and 2 on this one to make it light up.
Okay, so the point of that tape, aside from the fact that it's incredibly cute, is that not only was this cute little boy solving the problem this way, what Christina showed and other experiments have shown is that when children are just playing around like this, what they're really doing is systematically testing all the hypotheses about how the world works. And just by playing around in this way, the children figured out how the machine worked, and not only figured it out, but figured it out in a profound and intelligent way. And I want to emphasize this because often when people hear about how much children can learn, they think what we need to do is get them in school earlier. So we need to make kindergarten more like first grade, and we need to make preschool more like school. And in fact, what our research is showing is just the opposite. This kind of spontaneous play is the way that these very young children, these preschoolers, are finding out as much as they are about the world around them. Now, what I've been talking about so far is children learning about the physical world, learning about things like ping pong balls and blicket detectors. But one of the things that's most important for children to learn about is to learn about how other people's minds work, learn about the social and psychological world. And again, this was something that traditionally people thought children didn't understand until well into the school age period. We thought maybe this was because people just weren't asking them the right way. So one of the deep questions that we can always ask is, can you understand that someone else could take a different perspective than you do, that someone else could say want something different than you do? I understand we have a few politicians in the audience, and I imagine they would say that it can be hard even for grown-ups sometimes to figure that out. What we wanted to do is ask whether even young babies could figure that out, could take the perspective of another person. So what we did was we gave the babies 2 bowls of food. 1 bowl of raw broccoli, 1 bowl of goldfish crackers. And even in Berkeley, the babies like the crackers and they don't like the raw broccoli. But then what happened was that the experimenter took a little bit of food from each bowl. And we know that babies recognize facial expressions and understand emotions from the time they're very young. So what she did was she would take a little bit of the broccoli and she'd go, "Ooh, yuck, broccoli." Or else she'd go, broccoli. Same way with the crackers. Ooh, yuck, crackers. Or, crackers. Now, for half the babies, she acted as if she wanted the same thing as the babies. But half the time, what she did was act as if what she wanted was the opposite of what the babies wanted. So she'd go, broccoli, yuck, crackers. And then she simply put her hand out. We put both bowls of food in front of the baby, and she said, "Give me some." Now, here's the question. What will the babies give her? Will they give her when she says she likes the broccoli, will they give her the broccoli or the crackers? Well, 18-month-olds will give her the broccoli if she likes the broccoli, the crackers if she likes the crackers, and the broccoli if she likes the broccoli, even though they can't stand the broccoli. So these 18-month-olds, just barely walking and talking, already understand this deep thing about human nature and already are behaving, in a sense, in an altruistic way to try to get the person what it is that they really want. On the other hand, 14-month-olds didn't do this. The 14-month-olds took a long time if she acted like she liked the broccoli, but they always just gave her the crackers. So not only are the 18-month-olds showing this incredibly sophisticated understanding of other minds, but they seem to learn it between 14 months and 18 months. How could they be learning this? Well, we think that, as we said before, they're learning through statistics and experiments. And in fact, there's a fantastic new study that just came out taking off from that ping pong bowl experiment I just told you about. So what they did was they did exactly this ping pong bowl experiment, except now with 20-month-olds. And then when the experimenter took 4 white balls out of a mostly red box, they put a red ball and a white ball in front of the child, and the experimenter put her hand out and said, can you give me one? Well, if she had done the non-random thing, if she took mostly white balls out of a red box, they would give her a white ball. So they seem to have figured, oh, okay, the only reason why she would have done this unusual thing is because she really wants the white balls. If she took red balls out of a red box, so she just acted randomly, then they didn't show any preference for giving her red versus white. So these children seem to have taken that statistical pattern. I took out this non-random sample and used it to infer something about the preferences of the other person. Again, this is with 20-month-olds. We also think that babies are doing experiments to figure out how the world works. And these experiments, if we called the other experiments about the physical world getting into everything, we call the experiments about the psychological world the terrible twos. So the thing that's so terrible about the terrible twos isn't that children do things that you don't want them to. At least until they're 31, they do things that you don't want them to. It's that they do things because you don't want them to. So think of that baby, that 2-year-old, as being like a little scientist who sort of has her notebook there and is saying, aha, 1 inch away from the vase, mom starts to fume, half an inch away from the vase, steam starts coming out of her ears, and, push the vase and mom explodes. So we think that those terrible twos are really experiments about what happens when your desires are different from the desires of someone else. There are other ways that children find out about other people. One of the most peculiar phenomena in young children is the fact that children pretend so much. And one of the most fun examples of this is the fact that many young children actually have these imaginary friends, imaginary companions. This is actually Jimmy Stewart's imaginary friend, Harvey. But here are the imaginary friends that Marjorie Taylor, who's a great, wonderful psychologist at Oregon, found out about. And Marjorie actually went and asked children in detail about their imaginary friends. Now, again, the conventional wisdom was that children had imaginary friends because they couldn't discriminate between appearance and between fantasy and reality. They didn't know the difference. But studies that Marjorie and others have done have shown that, in fact, children understand perfectly well that the imaginary friends are really imaginary. They just like hanging out with them. They know the difference between the real world and the imaginary world, but if they could choose to live in one world rather than the other, they'd rather live in the fantasy world, and who could blame them? What it turns out, though, that what children are doing when they're exploring these imaginary friends is figuring out how other people's minds work. And you could think about this as being the way that scientists do a thought experiment to try to figure out what would happen if we accelerated a rocket ship to the speed of light. We think that when children are pretending, what they're really doing is producing what we call counterfactuals. They're producing these alternative ways that the world could be and trying to figure out what would happen if the world worked in these ways. A nice illustration of this, an imaginary companion that I am actually related to, is my brother, who's actually a writer for The New Yorker, growing up in literary Manhattan, had a 3-year-old daughter, Olivia, who had an imaginary companion called Charlie Ravioli, and he was too busy to play with her. So she would say things like, I bumped into Charlie today in the coffee shop, but he was too busy, he had to run. We're going to try and get together next week. Or she would leave messages on an imaginary answering machine. So she'd say, Charlie, it's Olivia. Could you get back to me? And then she'd turn to her mother and say, I always get his machine. Now, aside from being a funny story, what this suggests was that Olivia, who was only 3, was already figuring out the structure of psychological life in literary Upper West Side Manhattan, right? That you leave messages on people's machines. Marjorie found out that, in fact, the children who had imaginary friends and who engaged in more pretend play actually understood other people's minds better, did better on tasks like that broccoli and cracker task, than the children who didn't have pretend companions. So yet again, when children are just playing around, just pretending, what they're really doing is figuring out things that are much deeper than figuring out letters and numbers, figuring out how the other people around them work. So imagination, like truth, is something that we see for the first time in these very young children, and it seems to serve as basic and fundamental an evolutionary function as they're figuring out about the world.